Welcome, everyone, to our 2023 NAB wrap-up for this year. Then thank you to ARI for providing the space and the venue for this. Excellent space, love it. We also want to thank our sponsors. First and foremost, we want to thank B&H for their continued support of the New York section. Thank you. Thank you very much. Well appreciated. We also want to thank our other friends of SMPTE and for their support throughout the year. And if you want to go and support New York SMPTE, you can go to the Friends of SMPTE page and sign up. Speaking of signing up, how many of you are members? Okay, let's turn it around. How many of you are not members? Okay. Well, you can sign up tonight to join SMPTE. And SMPTE is a wonderful organization that I have been a member of for many, many years. And I would strongly encourage you to join. Perhaps Rose could come up and say a few words about membership. This is Rose Lockwood.
Thanks for coming tonight, and welcome to the New York section meeting on an NAB wrap-up. I know I spoke to quite a few of you as you entered tonight about joining SMPTE, and I hope that you will do that as you promised. Some of the perks of, being a member, there are over almost 6,000 members worldwide. Many, many chapters, and currently we're almost up to 30 student chapters. So the future of SMPTE is coming our way. And being a member, you have access to the community, like being part of this. There's ways to enhance your career by being part of SMPTE. SMPTE recognizes members and volunteers for the work they do, and having it on your resume doesn't hurt. So, and the biggest part of what you get from SMPTE is the knowledge. There's many, many courses online. There's conferences that we hold. I mean, there's just a wealth of information that can help you advance your career. So there's many good reasons for joining SMPTE, so I hope that you will consider it and help the organization continue to grow and support you. Thank you.
Little housekeeping tonight. The election results are in, and first I'd like to thank our outgoing team of managers, which would be Farisa Amid and John Gallagher, who I believe is here. I don't see Farisa here, though. John Gallagher's there. And also Barry Grossman, who is also here somewhere. There's Barry. Okay, well, big thank you to you. And coming in next year, as of July 1st, 2023, is myself as section chair, and John Gallagher, again, as secretary-treasurer. Where's John? Where's John? Raise your hand. There you go. There's John. And then we have Bernice Herskovitz for a second time around as a manager. And we have Mr. Mark Foreman, who is around here somewhere with a camera. There you go. And then we have Nick LeBone also, which not sure he's here. No, okay. We also have the Connecticut section chair is Brian Kobelar. And Wes Simpson as the secretary-treasurer for the Connecticut subsection. I haven't seen him here tonight, but I think you all know Wes. And then we also have, we're reestablishing the Long Island section, and we have Glenn Govier as chairman for the Long Island section. I don't know if is Glenn here? No? And then we also have Frank Chiagetta as the secretary-treasurer for the Long Island section. Let's give a big round of applause for the new board members as of July 1st. And now, I'd like to move on to our main event here. So who's going to be emceeing this? I don't think, Mark, are you? Jeff Cohen's going to MC this. Okay. Oh, you thought it was me. Okay.
All right. Thank you, Ed, and welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening. As you know, this evening's presentation has become a long-standing ritual that we do here in New York. Every year we review what we saw at NAB. For those of us who are in booths during the show, we never get to leave the booth. So if it were not for this meeting, we would have no idea what was happening at NAB every year. So I really look forward to this. Some of the folks on our panel have been here year after year, and we're used to hearing from them, and that's become a great tradition. In particular, Mr. Leitner here in the middle. And then we're very pleased to have some additional folks today. We have Mr. Bonini from Meredith Broadcast, and we have Brian Kobolars, who is a director of photography and has a company called Telecine Productions in Connecticut, and has for decades done work for such large clients as the U.S. Navy's submarine operations. So lots of experience in video production. So all of them were at NAB and looked greatly and closely at what was offered. And we're going to hear from them this evening, and they all have slides and videos to share with us. And at the end, there will be an opportunity to ask questions. But to begin, who is first up? We're going to have Nathaniel. So let's welcome Nathaniel. Thank you.
Hello, hello. Hi, folks. Nathaniel Bonini here. I'm Executive Director of Workflow Tools and Technology at Dotdash Meredith, which is a fancy way of saying that I am responsible for the production, the technology in the production pipeline for acquisition and post-production for the video team at DDM. So want to thank SMPTE and Mark Foreman for putting this on and airy for this beautiful facility. So let's see if my slideshow works here. There we go. So I just want to talk a little bit about my focus at NAB. I've focused on my current business needs, which is always asset management. Right now I'm responsible for not only our asset management systems, but the asset management team. I think a lot of conversations get had about acquisition and post-production, but I think a lot of time is not spent talking about what's the pipeline, what do I do with that material once I've acquired it, and how do I post it and how do I get it into distribution. So one thing, as many of you know, that I've been interested in the last, say, 7 or 8 years is cloud collaborative tools in the cloud. And I think those are important for replacing on-prem infrastructure, on-prem SAN infrastructure particularly, and heavy-duty compute for things like transcode and transform. Storage and storage migration are very important tools for us these days. As we move into some of these cloud-native workflows, we have a lot of unmanaged data that needs to be moved into the cloud. And then another area of interest is in fast origination. So for those of you who have been paying attention to the networks who have a huge, I don't want to say it's a backlog of content, but a huge catalog of content that has been maybe marginally monetized, that people are looking to stand up these channels, not only for their backlog of content, but to support new content. Some of the interesting things that have happened recently are, for example, Paramount Plus stood up a channel for the TV show Picard that just played the premiere episode over and over and over again and generate a great amount of interest for that. And then there's some other interesting technologies. I think we always have to make time for things that interest us outside of our business needs and sort of satisfy an intellectual curiosity. So that I'll talk a little bit about at the end of my presentation. I do want to, let's see, let me move on to the next slide here. So when we talk about asset management and cloud workflow, one of the technologies that I've been looking for is the ability to manage or to make searchable unmanaged data, right? So for those of you, how many of you have a SAN on-prem? Not a ton. How many of you have any kind of shared storage at all? A few more. Okay, so I suppose in a larger organization, where you have many editors working. At the height of our production, we had 120 edit workstations hooked up to via 16 gig fiber to our SAN, doing a lot of post-production of our content, and our ability to manage that data is only limited to what we can process and our ability to collect metadata about those assets that are coming in. Now, North Shore Automation has a product called Akomi, which is a cloud-native dam. How many people use dams and MAMs in their daily work? Not many at all. Wow. How many people know what a dam or a MAM is? All right. That's more encouraging. So a MAM is a subset of what a dam does, but a MAM is for facilitating the post-production process. And of course, a dam is a larger asset management system that will handle any kind of digital asset that you can throw at it. So the neat thing about what Akomi can do is it can not only index the content for you, it has plugins to all kinds of machine learning algorithms. It will catalog that stuff and then put it in an archive for you. So it is a very inexpensive and easy way to, say, put a front end on the top of that unmanaged data so you can start figuring out what's in there. It's important to my particular workflow, because not only do we work with our MAM extensively, but we have a lot of teams that maybe decide not to play ball with the standard operating procedures and just go out and shoot something and post it. So frequently, we'll get a team with a finished project and they'll come in and say, hey, what do I do with this? And then either we have to ingest it into the MAM or we park it in a dam for later use. So we're really looking for tools that are easy to use that will help us manage that data. Couple of neat things about Akomi is that it is cloud native, and when we say cloud native, we're not necessarily spinning up instances of machines to run it. It's running on perhaps a serverless architecture using native cloud services. You're not spinning up a SQL database. You're using a native database built into your cloud service. So those sorts of tools are important to keep the ease of use, especially the administrative burden on the back end is very important to keep that as low as possible. Some of these systems, you know, a MAM being an ecosystem of products that sort of facilitate the post process, you have a lot of moving parts to use. So the less you have to administer it, the better off you are. So one of the other important things about a COMI is that it tracks titles and not files. A lot of asset management systems will simply track files and will leave a parent-child relationship out of the mix, where you might have to custom code that. Now that's important for taking your hero asset and repurposing it for Square video or for 9:16 social media video. Everybody needs these kinds of videos, but in many systems it's very difficult to relate those child assets back to the hero asset. So that's important. The other interesting thing that a COMI can do is it supports fast playout, both AVOD and SVOD. Anybody support VOD platforms, either advertising or subscription? Couple of handfuls, yeah, okay. So very important to be able to take that content and repurpose it as needed through a fast playout channel. So the next thing I have here is a product from Backlight Creative called Iconic, which is a MAM. And so the MAM and the DAM can work hand in hand, where as I said, your MAM is facilitating production or post-production of your assets. It's making them searchable. It's protecting them in an archive. And my focus on looking at these products was that they are easy to deploy, they're inexpensive, and they are cloud native. So we're not spinning up a lot of different instances of different types of machines to run them. So very important. The other interesting thing about Iconic, and I'm going to talk about this in the next slide, is it has seamless integration with LucidLink. Has anybody here used LucidLink in their workflows? I see a couple of heads nodding. Okay, it's magic, but we'll get there in one moment. Next on my list of interesting interesting products is a company called Highscale. It's a German company. They have a workflow engine called Jobs. Those of you who have used various workflow engines from, say, Aspera Orchestrator, Telestream Vantage, those are fantastic workflow engines, and the main reason is that they are visual or node-based workflow engines where you can create and repurpose nodes as you build your workflow. So it's very easy to have a more agile environment to build those workflows. So the visual workflow engine is important. The other important piece of this is that it can run anywhere. It can run on a VM, it can run in a hybrid environment, and it can run solely in the cloud. So it really gives you a flexibility of not only doing your transcoding, but doing your workflow orchestration visually. And it's all based on BPMN, which is business process management notation. So it's a very well-known schema to develop your workflows. The other nice thing about it is there are no GPUs that are required. So if anybody is working in the cloud, you know that a GPU instance costs about 4 times what a cluster of CPUs costs. So very important to be able to get rid of that GPU requirement and just use and scale out using a lot of CPUs. So let's see. Then the next thing I looked at a couple of sessions. There were cloud editorial sessions for Collaborative Post. A lot of folks here know that in my last job, I was working at a company that did VDI workstations for post-production. I still think that's a very important aspect of providing workstations for post-production. One of the things that you find quickly is that as you're working on these workstations, they can get very costly. And I still don't have a good answer for when people say, well, I could just go to Best Buy and buy a workstation and throw 64 gig of memory in there. Why wouldn't I do that? Why? The reason you wouldn't do that is you have a geographically diverse workforce. And one of the things that we did 2 acquisitions ago at the same company I'm in, so this was at Time Inc., was to use a VDI solution called Bebop, and we implemented that so that we could find talent that was not in New York or Los Angeles. So we were able to provide a fully integrated environment to people and not worry about controlling their workstations. We had full control over the environment, so very important in post-production. So some of the interesting companies there, if you're looking for virtual workstations, are Vagon, Renderoo, Bebop. They're all different aspects of VDI solutions for post-production. Collaborative post-production was a great session. And one of the, I think Apple just released Final Cut Pro for iPad. Who is using Final Cut Pro for their workflows? I see 2, 3 hands. Okay. Who's using Avid? Premiere Pro. How do you guys edit? Yeah, with a splicer. Okay. I'm going to send Dave to go out and find a box of sprocket holes a little bit later. Right. So some of the interesting things that are coming down the pipe. I don't see Adobe really talking about Adobe Rush anymore. I think it was really for social media use. Apple just released Final Cut Pro for the iPad, and of course we now have DaVinci Resolve with a Teams aspect to it. One of the interesting use case there is decoupling the UI from all of the compute power that you need. So if you can edit on your iPad and render in the background on a machine that's not local to you, you've got the best of all worlds. You can use a lightweight client for your editor, and then you can have your compute be wherever it needs. How am I doing on time, Mark? Is it all right? All right. So, and then the final session that I saw was called Media Workflow, and one of the questions poses, if cloud is the answer, what's the question? And so I'm not so sure that a lot of people are rushing to the cloud to do some of these workflows, and I'm not sure that is the cost-effective way to go unless you have a large geographically diverse workforce. For the smaller teams, I really think that if you have a team of 5 people working in a small shop, having something like a small storage appliance like an SNS Evo, and there are many appliances that you can use for shared storage in that environment. So I think really the cloud brings us those collaborative environments, and they also bring us an ability to experiment with workflows that we haven't had before. So moving on to storage and storage migration, LucidLink is a tremendously powerful product. I would encourage you, if you haven't tried it and you need shared storage, before you rush out and buy a SAN, go and try LucidLink with a couple of people. One of the demos that I used to do was to take a ProRes 4x4 file, put it in my LucidLink folder, and start editing on my cloud workstation almost immediately. And this is a 10 gig file that needed to make its way up into the cloud. The beauty of it is it is truly a SAN replacement. It's super easy to use and implement. It just looks like a shared hard drive to all of the users. It has an amount of cache on the local drive, and it only brings in the chunks of the file that it needs, as opposed to downloading the entire file. So it's very efficient. It's lightning fast to make changes because it only changes the file delta. It doesn't change the whole thing. One other neat thing that they announced at NAB, or maybe they announced it at SVG in December, I'm not sure. But they have a live workflow where it enables them to edit growing files in the cloud, and that's a tremendously powerful thing to be able to do. And then they can drop that onto an EVS and send it to the truck for playout. And finally, as I'm sure there are a lot of Apple users out here in the audience, it just works, and it really does just work. It's a very cool tool. The next thing I want to talk about is the SNS Evo that I'd mentioned. They have a personal workflow appliance called a mod. Is anybody familiar with the Evos? Have you used the storage at all? See one hand come up, half a hand over there. So there are a couple of neat things. Is they've got asset tagging, so you can tag your assets. They have transcoding built into the unit, so it is also a SAN and a NAS, so you get the best of both worlds there. They're inexpensive, they're easy to configure, and it comes with all of the Evo tools, bells and whistles of the big brothers. So it allows you to do clustering, it allows you to do replication, it allows you to do a lot of things that some of the bigger storage providers provide. So it provides for a shared networked workspace for your team, and they can also be geographically diverse because you can set up replication against different units. So as I said, inexpensive and easy to set up is the mantra for today. So I was quite impressed with that tool. Next up is SFS Media, which is a new company, I want to say out of France, and they essentially are doing monitored transfers from LTO tape into the cloud. So they will monitor your tape library. They will transfer it into the cloud, and they have a NOC, which is monitoring it 24/7 as it's going. So they typically know well in advance if there's an issue that needs to be resolved on-prem. So a very cool middleware, integrates directly with Avid for those Avid users out there, and is a fully managed workflow for file transfers. The next one that I looked at, which is very cool, is the Telestream Diva. It was the evolution of SGL from Mastech. Anybody using SGL as middleware or Diva or those products? I have an SGL installation myself. And it promises smarter LTO restores, and it has a very interesting workflow engine that will allow you to do some pretty complex filtering on your restores. And as you're looking to migrate, it will also act as a data mover to move into the cloud. So, interesting piece of kit from Telestream. It is not new, but it's something that is worth mentioning here. So, moving on from there, I think, if I can get this to, there we go. Fast origination and content monetization. So fast free ad supported television, I'm sure you all watched it. As I said, everybody's got a mountain of content that they need to monetize and deal with. Because if your content isn't making money, it's only costing you money, right? Because you got to store it. I looked at a company called Mux IP. They have some very interesting patents in the playout space that allows them to ingest from all media management systems and all types of content. So they can. It's really a back end that helps you with your advertising. It does Scuddy marker insertions. It will do transcoding, live transcoding between for different platforms, and it really provides a place for universal delivery of either VOD content or live content to a fast partner like a Pluto or any of the MVPDs. How many people? Everybody know what an MVPD is? Handful? Okay. Comcast is a cable head ends or MVPDs. They aggregate content, spit it out to your television. That's Pluto is a good example as well. Next here is Norigin Media. They are a new player in fast delivery. I believe they come out of a Finnish tech group. They have a suite of test tools to make sure that your fast delivery is being delivered correctly to the end user. They also have a suite of what they call micro-modular UI components for designing your for designing your OTT application. So if you are in the business of designing OTT applications, Norigin can be your streaming partner for that and your application partner. They have a full suite of QA tools. It's a really neat tech startup for fast origination. Next one that I looked at, which was interesting, is a new offering by JW Player and BitCentral. BitCentral, of course, has a very robust playout engine for linear playout. BitCentral is the partner for doing the electronic program guides, and it's really a robust product. Dynamic fast feeds for. I'll give you an example. Most of the content in my company is about 2.5 minutes long, right? So that's an average of even the 22-minute content down to the 30-second content that we do. So as that stuff comes online, it can be incorporated into the linear channel and played out directly. So it's an interesting offering from JW Player and BitCentral. They're also, I just want to say this, there are a lot of players in the fast market. So it was just an interesting product that I saw in this particular instance. Next one is another one from Backlight Streaming called Zype. One of the neat things about Backlight's offering of products is they're very easy to use and they're very easy to deploy. And they allow you to, you really don't need a lot of technical skills to deploy these products. Zype allows you to distribute to any platform that you may have. It's O&O, third party. The model is also very scalable, so it's pay as you go, build as you go, or not. We work in a very elastic business, so things come and go, and content distribution scales and changes all the time. And then finally, there was a session on the fast channels and the evolution of broadcasting. It was interesting from a technology standpoint, not so much, really more about marketing, audience building, and building your fast brands. So that's one worth looking into. I don't have a lot of comments on that because it wasn't really engineering centric. Finally, we look at interesting technologies, and one very interesting technology that I looked at and had been trying to wrap my head around this company for years, called Alluvio. And Alluvio is a very different way of distributing content. They use a protocol called the Fabric protocol, which means that everything is baked in to the content fabric, they call it. So when you put your content into Alluvio, it is content aware. It analyzes your content for you, creates enhanced metadata. The way they describe it is it understands your content. It's self-understood by the content fabric, and I'm still wrapping my head around what exactly that means. But there's a lot of machine learning in the back end that goes on to understanding what's in that content and how it can be discovered. They have a lot of machine learning, as I said, that auto-recognizes clips within the content, and they have a real-time monetization engine, which has some interesting features where you would normally have to mine a database and do a lot of correlations to figure out what your users are doing with your content. If your content is on Alluvio, and I want to get this right because it's a complex interaction, but using Web3 technologies, and I don't use that lightly because I think a lot of the Web3 technologies are snake oil. But they really seem to have nailed a method of being able to track your users' use of not only your content, but also the types of things that can be used with your content. For example, coupons for one of the examples that was used was if you're watching a piece of content, you got a coupon for Lowe's. You could track the use of that coupon and whether it was redeemed or not, what it was redeemed for, and it's all in the public blockchain. So you can then, all you have to do is go and query that token, and you can see exactly what that user did. It's very secure, and some of the interesting things that they can do are very low latency, live transcoding. They call it a media wallet. So you have your media available to you from any content node that they have, and their Fabric protocol is all in one. There's no microservices, there's no transcoders, there's no databases. It sort of just is. So it's a fascinating product, and anybody who's doing VOD or live and wants to monetize. Or make those things shoppable, monetize just beyond the advertising. This would be a great technology to look into. Excuse me. And then the final thing I want to talk about is SMPTE's future of cinema. And I just got to say, as a technologist in media, this thing is so effing cool. The MSG sphere. How many have you all heard of the MSG sphere? See a handful of hands. It's for those of you who haven't been following it, it's an enormous venue in Las Vegas. They're looking to do them around the world. It is unprecedented in scale for multimedia presentations. The promise is of this wildly innovative creative space. And one of my takeaways from watching these two folks from Holoplot, which was the audio vendor, and Seventh Sense, which is the overall integrator, is that an artist could literally play the sphere like a musical instrument. So if you imagine that you were in a holodeck, You know, you've got a television that surrounds you, video that surrounds you, audio that comes from everywhere and nowhere at once, with multiple programs going to separate sections of the audience. I mean, it is just a remarkable feat of engineering. So I think it's supposed to open in November with a U2 show as their first show. So next time you guys go to Las Vegas, it's likely well worth taking a look at this venue. And one of the really neat things that they do is because the raster is so big, I think it's like 25K by 15K is the ultimate raster that you see on the screens. Their intent is to use a lot of generative video so that they can generate it with things like the Unreal Engine, put objects in there, put triggers for the artist to use, and not have to generate 25K by 15K video for every single show that goes through. Anybody who's ever rendered anything out that large knows what a pain that is. So finally, MSG sphere. Oh, well, fat fingered that one. It's MSG sphere. Finally, I saw this white paper. It came out in March 23rd, and I wanted to leave you with this thought. I know I've talked about cloud. I've talked about cloud collaboration. There's a white paper that Amazon Prime Video put out in March, end of March, and you can read the title here. I can provide a link as well. But what was fascinating is they used an entire cloud-native workflow with microservices and step functions to expand those services as needed, and Lambda functions, and all of these functions to allow you to scale your video distribution as needed. But what they found was that if they moved away from that sort of more that cloud native microservice architecture to a monolithic architecture where they're actually spinning up machines and running services on machines so they could scale vertically, which means growing the machine, as opposed to scaling horizontally, which just means adding more services, it would save them on hidden costs. And if any of you, how many of you are migrating or working in the cloud right now? A handful of people. So for those of you who aren't, one of the things that you'll discover is the hidden costs of working in the cloud. And they're simply costs that you didn't know you needed to pay for. Networking. For example, listing your directory. Well, it costs you, I don't know, couple of cents, couple of tenths of a cent every time you list 1,000 files in your storage bucket. You know, everything you do costs. So our ability to save some money doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to shovel everything into the cloud. So this is well worth a read if you're architecting any cloud migration. So thank you for listening, and I'll pass the mic.
So thank you very much, Nathaniel. Nice presentation. We really appreciate that. And I'm going to give a little more detail now to Mr. Shubin's introduction. We're going to go to Mr. Leitner. Okay. I can do that. I can switch. So David Leitner is a working director of photography, mostly here in the New York region. David takes NAB very, very seriously. If you see him moving around on that show floor, he's generally running at full speed because he has so many appointments and so many booths. And he is our resident, first of all, he's our motion picture chair. It's an older term that goes back to our origins, but David is in charge of all technology regarding anything around either episodic or cinema style production, and is an expert, as you might imagine, on anything to do with cameras and lenses and lighting. So his presentation tonight will certainly focus on those things and what's new and interesting. Thank you, David.
So anyway, NAB 2023 and counting, 100 years, a centennial. So 1923, we weren't watching television. It was obviously radio. I can't even imagine what the first NAB show was like. You know, a bunch of people and a bunch of console radios, because they were pretty big back then. But anyway, so that's what we're celebrating. Now, when I grew up as a little kid in the South, this is what I saw on the TV all the time. It was kind of like the Hays Code of the television industry. Now, you guys in the North probably didn't take this seriously, but in the South, they sure did. So that's what I thought NAB was. What do I think? Oh, and my point is that our industry has come a long way. The reason you're looking at these screen grabs from my iPhone is that I got all 3 of these while I was at NAB this year. And this is about Netflix ending the distribution of DVDs. To me, that was a signpost, or a milepost, rather. It really signals a change. So we've come actually a long way from those giant console radios to the point where we're now discarding and obsoleting digital media. Now, these are not sex toys. This is another sign of the changes in the industry. What these are signature cables. You mean you don't know who Gerald Undone is? Does anybody? Not? Okay. These are YouTube influencers who in this case are at the sponsor Condor Blue products. Condor Blue makes little cages and things for small cameras. And it struck me, I looked at this and I said, pink cables? Like I need a pink HDMI cable or whatever the heck that is? See, there are multiple layers at NAB. There's an old guard and there's a young cohort moving in, and this is symbolic of that. It is their world. These are some numbers about attendance over the last 3 years, and you will see that the attendance has come up this year, 65,000, about more than 10,000 more than last year, and 166 countries represented. I'm an internationalist, so I like that. That, to me, is a sign of a healthy NAB. Some of the international companies are represented by these national pavilions. Again, that's a healthy sign. There was a 4-year period where we were putting up a wall around this country, and that wall has chinks in it now. It could go back up, but let's hope it doesn't. Back in 2022, a year ago, all these companies were missing. I made a list. It's not a complete list. And then I noted that this year, these companies came back. So again, that's also a healthy signal. Now, the companies that did not come back are motion picture companies, and they're all going to be at Cinegear in June. And that's a threat to the NAB show. The motion picture people now mostly feel that they get more bang for the buck if they go to Cinegear. They feel that NAB has become sprawling, so it's up to NAB to kind of refocus the show and see where it goes into the future. I'm not sure the motion picture people are wrong about that. Now, these are Chinese companies, and you know, if you've seen my previous presentations, I always use that as a sign, because I actually think that they do innovative work. Some of you think they copy, but I look at a lot of their work, and there's a lot of good design, and I see where it's going. So these were a lot of companies that came this year. I like the GVM, because that means Great Video Maker. That's a great name for a company if you're going to be in this business. Now, let's look at a couple of the booths. This is the Panasonic booth. And their little catchword this year was connect. Very clever, connect. Like last year, there were no cine cameras, I note that. But this year, there was a camera, a broadcast studio camera, had a really familiar feel to it. And if you look down there, it says powered by Vericam. What could that mean? So here's a studio camera with a PO mount and a lot of other features that anyone who ever used Vericams will recognize. Now we're going over to the Sony booth. I call this the banality of drivel. It's another catchphrase that means nothing. It's whatever, connected creativity or creativity connected. The guy on the right at the Sony booth, obviously forgot to power up his gimbal. I thought that was symbolic, but I won't extend that joke any further. Now this I found at the Sony booth, and I found it interesting. This is Alison Mendar, who I've known for years, PR person for Sony, and she had a 3D avatar of herself made. Now, how did they do that? Well, they created this thing that looks like an H.G. Wells time machine. And what it is a big cage surrounded by cameras. Cameras are attached everywhere. On the top, there's a light for illumination. There's 2 places to put your feet, just like in the scanners in the airport. And this was developed by these 2 guys at the bottom, Masamichi Nagoni and Hiroki Nishimura. Those are the 2 engineers, and they spent, I'm sure, months wiring those cameras up. And if you think it's difficult to stitch together a bunch of raw photos, imagine what that stitching process is like. And here's another slide of all the work that they did. Now, these cameras are all Sony cameras. I actually didn't look to see whether they were APS-C or full frame. I'm guessing. What, Mark? Full frame? Yeah, okay. That makes more sense because wider coverage. But they're small Sony cameras, and I'm going to come back to that point. On a side note, well, let's see. Yes, small Sony cameras like the Cinemaline FX3 and FX30. I have one of them right here. This is a camera that I own. It's a small little gray thing. It's a minimum. It's minimal in size. I don't hardly know how you could shrink this down any further because, of course, you've got to dissipate heat with 4K data flying through the camera. Where does the heat go? So I'm going to come back to this because we're going to see these little cameras popping up again and again. But this happens to be a Sony FX30, which means it's an APS-C or Super 35 camera. The larger full frame is the FX3. And here you see, I was walking around the floor and I kept finding these cameras everywhere. And if you look to the left, that looks like a big camera rig, except there's a camera missing. There's a big gap in the middle. The camera's not missing. Camera is right here, but it's this little tiny gray camera that I just showed you. So that's another sign of the times. This FX full frame, the larger sensor, was seen at a joint demo of products by Teradek, Wooden Camera, and Small HD. The monitor is a 5-inch monitor that can hit 3,000 nits, believe it or not, which still shocks me. There's a small Ultra 5-bolt 6K Teradek's monitor, not 6K, what am I saying? It's a Bolt 6, that's the brand name, monitor with built-in wireless 6 gigahertz transmitter. That's this right here. This is a combination 5-inch monitor with a 6 gigahertz transmitter, which is kind of amazing. On, again, the tiny, tiny camera, one of these little guys. So I'm going to go through some more camera stuff really quick. I'm going to speak about optical low-pass filters, low light, what I call turret syndrome, iPhoneography, and something called PTZ. And I'll explain what that means when we get there. Now, the Kinefinity, let's see, what am I showing you here? This Kinefinity on the left is a Chinese camera. People sometimes make fun of it a little bit, perfectly sophisticated. They show up at NAB every year, but it has an optical low-pass filter. What is that? That's a filter that is put in front of the sensor to kind of break up the finest high-frequency detail, to prevent moiré. When you point a camera, a digital camera, with its sensor, which has rows and columns of pixels at anything that has a regular pattern, if the 2 patterns are too close together in terms of their relative size, they cause moiré. Well, over the past several years, some camera companies have stopped putting on those optical low-pass filters, thinking that we have so much resolution in our camera, that's no longer an issue. But that's Black Magic discovered with the 12K Ursa. They discovered they had a big problem. So this year, one of their big introductions was the reintroduction of the URSA, this time with an OLPF, an optical low-pass filter put into it. And that's what I'm showing you over on the right. A surprise to them and a surprise to everybody. Now this thing is a Canon camera that has a remarkable capability. It has a SPAD sensor in it. And as you can read, a SPAD sensor is a single photon avalanche diode sensor. And what that means is that a single, I think it explains it there, and even if it doesn't, a single photon can hit a photosite, one photon, and it gets amplified 1,000,000 times, which means that this thing can virtually see in the dark. It also means there's virtually no noise. This camera, the MS500, according to Canon, is the world's first interchangeable lens camera with a SPAD sensor, and that could be. So on the left, the MS500 at the top is the camera I just showed you. Now, if you look at the bottom, the subject distance is almost 5 kilometers. That is looking at a boat 5 kilometers away with illumination of 0.1 lux. Now, I wonder who would be interested in a camera like this. Now, the one on the right, the ME-20F SH, that is the previous version of Canon's low-light camera. So this new low-light camera blows that old one literally out of the water. Now, over on the right, that funny little image you see with the alien, that was a technical demonstration of the camera. And the reason I'm not showing you the actual model is that that was in complete darkness. And if I took a picture of it, it would be a black frame. But that MS500 can see that. It is really shocking. That's why I wouldn't want to fight a war at night. They'd see you, but you'd never see it coming. Now, switching gears, this is what I call turret syndrome. And this is a guy, Ian Kerr, who's been showing this turret idea for at least 3 years at NAB. And he's diligent. He's actually a really good DP, and he's a really sincere and good person. But this fits his build. He's tall, rangy, and he can hold a camera like that. You see the muscles he's built up? On the top is a Sony FX9, which has this turret added to it. On the bottom is a Sony FX6, which has this turret added to it. Now, when you put three lenses like that on these cameras, you're adding the weight of 3 lenses and the weight of the turret. Hopefully you're counterbalancing that somehow. One of the problems is that how do you put a camera like this down on the ground? So he's worked out all those problems to his satisfaction. There's a Kickstarter campaign starting, I believe, in June. And he's going to try to actually make this. And my hat's off to him. I understand why this would be attractive in theory. In practice, I want something this size. You put any of the Chinese lenses, which I'm going to talk about more. I went around to all the Chinese lens manufacturers, bless their hearts, but their lenses weigh a ton because they're milling them all out of heavy metal. Put 3 of those or 3 Sigma lenses or any heavy lens that you know of on a camera like this, see what happens. Now the reason he's able to do this is that these lenses are all EF mount lenses, which have a much deeper flange focal distance than do the E-mount lenses on these cameras. So it gives them like 3 centimeters to play around with. And that 3 centimeters is what the turret occupies. This is iPhoneography. And over at Zacuto, they had the idea to use an iPhone as a monitor. Now, why not? This is an iPhone 10. It's pretty aged, it's long in the tooth, but it has a brilliant OLED in it. And when the iPhone 15 comes out, this is going to get replaced. Now, in the past, this would go on a shelf, but why would we do that? And so this idea is not a bad idea. Over here, this is how you can control the camera through an app. And you can see how it sits in the camera. I took a picture inside of the viewfinder, and it's actually not bad for what it is. Of course, someone's going to say, well, why do we need the camera at all? Why don't we just put the viewfinder on an iPhone? So, of course, somebody did that. And over on the right here, someone had the idea, well, how do you stabilize an iPhone? I mean, it's really hard to keep this thing level when you're shooting video. So they put these two handles on the end because you need something to, I'm being snarky if you don't get my tone. Now, over here, this is someone who's putting an anamorphic lens onto the camera using magnets. I like all those ideas. Not for me, but I like the ideas. I mean, they're clever. Now, on the right is a camera that I actually own. It's this camera. And I use this camera, exactly. I use this camera as a secondary camera when I'm shooting interviews sometimes. And the reason I'm showing you this is I'm showing you this here, made by a company called Axoon. And what it is, it's an adapter. And the adapter sends a signal into the iPhone through the lightning port on the iPhone. And this is actually the same iPhone that I've got in my pocket. And when this, in fact, when I buy that 15, this is going to be officially retired as a monitor. And why would I want this? Because that secondary camera is using autofocus to shoot a second close-up angle of an interview subject, and I can't be over there running that camera. So that camera's got to run itself, but I want to see what's going on. I'm old-fashioned enough that I don't trust the camera. So that's what this is, and it's the device is called SEMO, as in Seymour, or that's a man's name, but SEMO, you know what I'm saying. And the only problem is it doesn't charge the iPhone, which is what you're going to discover when you buy one, just as I did. So in NAB, and by the way, they just introduced this a few months ago. NAB is already, at NAB, SEMO, Axoon, the company, is actually introducing SEMO Pro like 3 months later. And what it does, it's about a $350 little box, and it does charge your iPhone, but that's not all. It's got SDI in and out on it. It has a more solid build. It has a few other tricks, and one of which I'm going to come back to in a moment. PTZ cameras. Now that's pan, tilt, zoom, if you haven't heard that before. And that's becoming a giant market. And why would that be? Well, for a couple of reasons. If you're in cinema, you've always wanted to put a camera on the end of a boom and then to remote control it, you know, to do a car commercial or something. But if you're everyone else in the world, you want to put one of these where you can kind of like look at the backyard of something, or look at the side of a building, or, you know, you've seen these police station interiors where they've got thousands of displays where they're looking at, you know, surveillance cameras from all over some city as they do in China. Well, these are really helpful, these PTZ cameras. Some of them can even sense, you know, in the same way that autofocus can sense an eye or sense a facial shape, they can sense the same and they can track. So this is all going in the direction of automation. It's all going in the direction of robotizing, if that's a word. It's all going in the direction, ultimately, of some sort of AI control where it can recognize and track individuals. Don't know what I think about it, but it's a fact of life now. Now, over on the right is what I saw at the Panasonic booth. It's their new UR100 camera. It looks kind of insidious up at the top, like sinister. But what they're saying is that it is perfect for sports. And Panasonic builds these PTZ cameras with a built-in lens. You can't change the lens. You're kind of stuck with the thing. I'm not really sure that's going to find an application in that market. Maybe on the high school level, I don't. But why would you do that? So this is Kreutzel, the German manufacturer from Munich, and they've come up with something very clever for Sony's FR7. And Sony launched FR7, I think, last fall. Is that right? And FR7 is the world's first PTZ camera. And doesn't this look an awful lot like that little camera I just had in my hand? That has an interchangeable lens in its full frame. Now that's interesting, right? It has 15 plus stops of latitude. It has almost all the same characteristics that this camera has. Well, now what could you do with this? in production, you could do a lot of interesting things, but one of the problem is PTZ, Z means zoom, but how do you zoom all those Sony lenses that don't have a built-in zoom motor? So what Croziel introduced was this teeny tiny little zoom motor that now interfaces with the Sony FR7. And now you can you can pan, tilt, and zoom to your heart's delight with lenses that don't have built-in zoom. Croziel also introduced something called a meta mount. And what it is, it's an active E-mount to PL mount adapter. Active means that you see this little connector right here? So it allows this Fujinon lens to be able to be controlled as if it were on a broadcast camera. That's a Cabrio, I believe, 85 to 300. That's actually a big deal if you own an expensive Cabrio, but you want to put it on a relatively inexpensive FX9, which is what that is. As a footnote, I wouldn't want a camera that long, but that's just me. I want something like this big, and I'm going to keep saying that. Now, what about PTZ and B? What would B be? Well, B would be boom. Well, what's the next thing? I want to change my angle of view. Well, you can't do that because you've got a PT and a Z. Well, these guys, Liebeck, came out with this, the first electric pedestal, and all it is it's a boom. It booms up, it booms down. You're going to see a lot more of that kind of thing. Now, speaking of powered booms, what is this? This thing that goes all the way up to the top up there. Does anyone recognize this light? Were you at our lighting seminar last November, SMPTE? That's the Cineo light that was demonstrated. Completely digital. It can spot, but it has no moving parts on the inside. It does have a cooling system, though. So what the heck is it doing on here, and why is it way up in the air? Well, this is a gigantic boom. And this was over at the Matthews stand. Now, there you get a better side of it. At the bottom of the stand, there's a little Jenny, but I mean cute. It's really cute and small. And so you have something on set that can do something you couldn't quite do before. I mean, before you needed some kind of a, God knows, crane or lift or something. Now, this is the company that's created the remote control for that head, because if you put a light way up in the air, you have to be able to what? Pan, tilt, and zoom, which is essentially mean you're changing the focus. So this guy, Erno Das, is a Dutch gaffer. He built all this stuff. His company is the Luxon company, I think it is, but Light Mover is the name of the product. And you can control it with a sort of game controller like this, or you can get into much more detail here. It's extremely well designed, extremely well built. And the other, here's a closer view. Now, in this case, it's a big array HMI, so you can see how it's attaching to the back of the HMI. You can see these pneumatic pistons, and you can imagine how it could tilt that light. It's also very useful for reflectors. Now, what can you do with reflectors out in the sun and during the day when you're shooting? So you can see this is a solution to a problem that's existed for a long time. Don't need ladders. Reflectors are light. So you can use much lighter stands as long as it's not a windy day. And here's another company, and what they say is aerial photography without a drone. And what they mean by that, it says here you don't need a drone, and up here it says 37.7 feet. That's pretty long for a fishing pole. So you can see that they could put a camera up there or a light, or whatever you wanted to put up at that height. I just see this coming as cameras grow lighter. This camera could go up on that pole really easily. These are some of the Chinese lens manufacturers. Like I said, they were all over the place. I played around with a lot of their lenses. Mechanically, they're fine. They're on the heavy side, and some of them are on the funky side in terms of what the autofocus capabilities that are claimed for them. Some of the materials are interesting. That's a carbon fiber barrel on that lens. I have never seen that before. Interesting. Over at Atlas Lenses. Atlas is an outfit started by a bunch of kids in Glendale, California. It's not clear to me where they're made. Do you know, Steve? Are they Chinese too?
The glasses source there, they assemble in California.
Yeah, glass is sourced from China. They assemble in California, and that sounds right. But they were demonstrating how cool their anamorphic flares were. And you can see this is a product of the show. I mean, a nominee is product of the 2023 show. This is their booth. And what they were doing was, this model was sitting in front of this camera. They were testing this Orion anamorphic lens, a Super 35 anamorphic. And they were shining an RGB light into the edge to flare. Now, this is kind of without the flare, but this is what they were demonstrating. This, to them, is not a bug, but a feature. They like anamorphic flares. I'm looking at this and going, oh, God. You know, that's a generation gap. I don't have anything further to say about that. Now, this is over at the Canon booth. Canon has a new series of lenses. They're not cheap. They're about 25 grand. But they're zooms that are really convertible. So they introduced this new one, a 31.5 to 95, Super 35. But let's say you have a full-frame camera and you don't want to buy a new zoom. Well, you change this thing they call a relay, and if you need to change the mount, you can do that too. You can buy all these different parts. When you change this to Super 35, it becomes 45 to 135. I mean, it's a lot cheaper than buying a second lens. So those, I don't know if those are selling well, but the idea is not delivering yet. Well, it's of the moment. Ingenue has done stuff like that. It's very much of the moment. Now, here's a battle between the big box lenses from, in this case, Canon and Fujinon. This Canon lens came out, I think, in 2018. It's I don't remember. What is it, 18?
It's for 2/3 inch.
Mark says it's for 2/3 inch.
But
Fine.
25 to 1,000 is for PL.
Right. If it's for 2/3 inch, it's on a B4 mount, right? Okay, so I'm wrong about that. Anyway, it's the battle of the box lenses without qualification. And this 25 to 1,000 is this new Fujinon lens. And here's a guy trying to see how close he can focus. Isn't that astonishing? And I saw him doing it. Here are two drop-in filter systems. First, these are filters for the iPhone, of course. And these are filters for your drone, like you're going to want to put a filter on your drone. And these are filter systems. This one's from a Chinese manufacturer, maker, and this is from a Kickstarter outfit. And in both cases, they're taking advantage of the short flange focal depth of E-mount, L-mount, RF mount, all these new mirrorless camera type of cameras. And you can put on like a longer E-mount lens, or in this case, that's probably a PL. It also has like a longer, I think I wrote that down somewhere, but it's 52 or 58. Do you remember the flange focal distance?
No, it's PL, so it's 52.
52.
But they're, the RF
Yeah.
are all 11, 12, 13 millimeters.
No, they're 20 or 18 or 19.5. They're in that neighborhood. But anyway, so they're all essentially the same from an optical designer's point of view. So these things, what's interesting here is that this little knob here is to change, that's a variable ND. So if you had a camera with a short flange focal distance and you bought this, you could put on this adapter for PL and you'd have a variable ND built in. These guys have exactly the same idea, and I have no idea what the costs are or what the delivery is, but that's what that is. Camera media. So this was a cool thing that I saw. Condor Blue made this handle, and you know what you put into it? A Blade SSD, NVMe SSD. How about that? 1 terabyte, 2 terabytes. Yeah, exactly. And the minute you see something like that, you go, uh-huh. And you can see that that's going to show up elsewhere, too. Rethinking the dolly. Panther has this really interesting device. I thought it was kind of cool. This is not a tricycle. It's not a pedal. It's a foot. Put your foot on that. Camera head goes here. Camera goes on top. It's just interesting. I like that people are rethinking things because cameras are getting smaller. Over here, to prove my point, this is from Surui. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it. Yeah, Surui. Chinese company. This is the smallest tripod head I've ever seen. That's a dime. And this is the smallest slider I've ever seen, and that's the same dime. So, you find everything at NAB. Now, this is something, I want to switch to the topic of stereoscopic. Let me play this for a moment. Just watch it. And you're probably...
Every content creation process is fully automated, so you need not, you need no special knowledge of 3D video.
Okay. What he was saying was of no consequence. I wanted you to look at this and go, what the heck is that? Because I'm not sure what it was either. It was inside of these bricks. These are solid bricks of glass, each one of these, and somehow that 3D of very low resolution came through. Now, Mark may talk about this, and maybe he'll give you a better explanation. But it took all these cameras, and you can see the configuration here, and it's called 6DOF, depth of field, I'm not sure, stereoscopic video content. And again, I'm not going to pretend that I went back twice to this site, and I still walked away not understanding what it was. Now, one of their slides said technical features, automated holographic content generation without intervention of 3D engineers and graphic designers. How about that? And then planoptic versus volumetric studio. Multiple objects. Yeah, okay. Background. Yeah, that's new. Optical phenomenon. Wow. No 3D engineers, designers. So even if this is badly translated from the Chinese, I still don't understand it. Okay. Now, over at the Sony site, they had this special reality display. I'm not going to make a joke about that. That's an unfortunate title, but whatever. See, I misread it. Spatial reality display. That insight into my brain. And what are these people doing looking at these donuts? So you might have guessed it. They're looking at 3D displays, lenticular. They're angled, like about 45 degrees or so. These displays are lighting their faces. And they're lighting their faces because this technology is tracking their eyes and tracking the position of their eyes within the area of their face. They make two versions of this, Sony. They make a 15.6 and a 27-inch version. This is an actual product for sale. And I spent a chunk of time playing with it because several people walking away were shaking their heads and going, this will never, no one's... I'm telling you, when it works, it's spectacular. The smaller one works better. The 15.6-inch works better for me than the 27-inch. But I looked at several video games on it, and it could hardly be better when it works. Your head has to be in the right place. It has to not lose track of your eyes, because when it does, it gets confused. You need to stand in the dark and look at a light donut. So if you're willing to do that, sit in the dark and stare at a donut, then you can play with this. And I think it has some possible use, especially for, I don't know, anything that requires turning 3D models around and studying 3D anything. I can see it. But hats off to Sony for trying another thing that's out of the ordinary. Crazy for medical? Well, that could be, but at the show that they were pushing it for a whole bunch of other purposes, like right up here. This is. I tried to get a shot of one of the video games I played for a few minutes. Sports, industrial design. I don't know what that is. Volumetric capture. I don't understand how that works, but design stuff. Anything that can be viewed in 3D. Medical, are you suggesting they put like a probe down somebody and?
Take MRI data and start looking.
Yeah. I'm just not touching that. So this is a 3D camera tech demo that I saw from Red. Red was a participating partner in this. It has a Canon stereoscopic lens on the front of it that came out a couple of NABs ago. You can see what it looks like on the monitor above the camera. It's always fun to look at this stuff. It's a 180-degree view. It's 3600K per eye. And this is not recording. This is sending a signal over the internet at 40 megabits per second. They used a Meta Guest headset. And I played with this, and it really looks good. And the young man that was manning the booth told me that he was interested in it for concerts and music of bands that he followed that he couldn't possibly follow around. But, you know, and I totally get that. I can see that. In 40 megabits, you know, where I live in the Lower East Side, I'm not always getting that, but most people in Korea and the civilized world get much faster speeds than that. So let's see. That's just more of a sight. That's the headset on the bottom. And that's the monitoring over on the side. They're using a Blackmagic box to send the signal over the internet. Now, now lighting. This is what's called a zero emissions generator on the left. Do you know what that is? It's a battery. I love that. That was at the Shape stand. I knew, at one point I knew how big that was, but anyway. On the right is an LED, RGB LED light for the cost of 2 hot dogs and drinking chips. I don't know what that means, but it's just a comment on the times. Maybe it's a comment on how expensive food is at the convention center. On the left, that's giving a new meaning to bending light, perhaps. On the right is Steve Robinson, who's been on the front row here giving me information. He's at a light star stand, and he's trying to measure the huge volume of light, that scorching light that's coming out of those LEDs. This is what, when you turn the light down, those LEDs look like. There's red, green, blue, amber. It looks like white. Yeah, 2 whites. And you can see that these are pancake-shaped and that they can splay out or be directed inward if you want to kind of, in effect, spot them. Ari showed, of course, the orbiter, and for some reason they showed that it could withstand, like, a rainstorm. On the right is from Godox. These are flat, thin as a piece of paper, but can they withstand the rain? Can they withstand wind? I don't know. They look like sails to me. I think you want to use those indoors. This is a light from Aperture. It's a low-cost line that Aperture has just launched. It's called Amaran, and it's a chip-on board. You can see here. These are standard Bowen mount, little Bowen mount fixtures. This thing is really cheap. I think it's a couple of $100. But the design is really good, and I played around with it. I just like the direction that kind of thing is going. I made a note to myself to tell you that, you know, light answers to physics. So small may be better in general, but small can never really answer the needs of lighting. And this is very true, but still, to have these little things on hand that aren't expensive, that you can play with and experiment with and add just that little touch, never bad. It will run off of 2 Sony L-series batteries, which you can see on the right over there. I mean, who doesn't have a stack of those lying around? I mean, seriously, I do. Over here is, from Felix, is a LEGO kind of light, focusable. You can cut it with those cutters, and this is the light engine that's inside of it, which I thought was kind of interesting. This is a polycarbonate plastic body. It's very lightweight. The battery lasts for 3 hours. It's like a 270 watt-hour battery. I just think this is the bee's knees for certain types of things. Light is always good, less complicated, versatile. None of us like carrying around cases these days that we don't have to. This is a similar sized light from Datolite. This is the fruit of a collaboration between Prolite, however you pronounce it, and Datolite, which began about a year ago. So inside is a Prolite engine, light engine, RGB, amber, cyan, and lime, and very high, all of the, TCLI and CRI, all that stuff, very, very high numbers. So I thought that was very interesting. I don't have a cost on that. I couldn't. Do you know, Steve? I know it's going to be expensive. Datolites are always expensive. Dato also has been kind of pioneering very interesting reflector materials. Now, those of you who are doing lighting know that people are using professionally made reflectors more and more, but these are adding color and scrambling color. And in real life, there isn't one color of light ever hitting you unless you're in a room that's monochromatic. None of us rarely are. So I found these very, very interesting. I didn't ask, again, what they would cost because I think they'd be expensive. This is another type of a trend in lighting. This is called image-based lighting. Brian is going to talk about volumetric work. This enters into that world. What image-based lighting is lighting that can track a screen in back of you. If let's say you're standing in front of a screen in a volumetric space and there's a bunch of imagery behind you that's moving, or let's say you're in a phony, like in a phony car, and it has a screen behind you and you're supposed to be seeing stuff in the background moving behind you. Well, what about the light that's hitting you from the sides and from the front? Shouldn't that be changing too? Because in reality, you're driving past various things. Maybe you're driving past a street where the sun is setting at the end of the street and suddenly you go orange and then you go whatever color. Well, that's been impossible to do or difficult to do. Image-based lighting is a technology, I don't know if that's the right word, but it's an approach where you sample lights in the background on whatever screen you're putting an image on behind your subject, and those areas that are sampled, they cue the RGB lights to put very low light levels on, say, the subject or subjects. Does that make sense? Did I explain that reasonably?
It turns a video raster into the raster of the light. So whatever video signal you have gets rasterized, and the light becomes a set of...
I'm trying to keep it simple. Oh, wait, I like image-based lighting, but anyway, this company, Mimic, is owned by or represented by KinoFlow. I don't know if maybe this is a KinoFlow product. I saw it at the Kino booth, and he knows what he's doing, so I know it's going to work great. Now I said earlier I was going to return to Axsoon, and Axsoon makes that CMO, and I said there was a CMO Pro that just came out and had another feature. Well, this is that other feature. You might recognize Grumpy Alistair Chapman, if you know who that is. He's the guy in the picture. What this does is, pretend this is a cheap Costco television screen behind this guy, because that's essentially what it was, right? And let's say he's supposed to be moving through space, and so the background is moving, and then things are supposed to be passing him by. Well, how can we do that? You see these squares right here? This one says 1, this one says 2. These are channels that are being sampled from the raster of this LCD screen. You can argue that LCD screens don't have rasters, but I'm not getting into that. And this software can handle up to 8 channels. So you could put 8 of these squares within which the video color and what I would call density, but brightness, is being measured. So obviously you wouldn't put it on the face, you'd put it in these areas here. And as these areas changed in color and brightness, the Pro lights, which are tied into this system wirelessly, they would wax up and down to try to mimic what was going on in the background. Does that make sense? ProLight, being a company represented by Mitch Gross, is Mitch here? And CMO being a company represented by Mitch Gross. I wonder how those two things came together. Now this thing is $350. Now, you may say, it doesn't do this, it doesn't do that, can't do this. $350 and a Costco screen. Now, you have to own a bunch of Pro Lights, or you have to know where to rent them. I'll grant you that. It's an interesting proposition, because here's another example of the same thing. This was over at the Amazon booth, and this is a car, and I don't know why it says virtual production. I don't know why they're showing this, but they had it all rigged up. And the whole idea is that this is the Costco screen over here, and there's a camera shooting through this window, and you can see the moving background. I mean, again, I don't know why they were demonstrating this. I just thought I'd show it to you, because this isn't a bright showroom, and being in a bright showroom, whatever the light is on the face of the person sitting in the car is all wrong. So I just noticed that. But over at B&H, they decided to go whole hog. Now, did any of you see the B&H? Okay, some of you did. And you know, basically, this guy here is the model, just a big statue. And this is what I call image-based lighting up on top. This is some over here. This is some over here. They've got this gigantic wall back here that's displaying a background at night. And you can see better what these lights are doing. This is one of the lights dedicated to this system. This is the background video. This is the light. And here is dimmer so you can see the colors. So you can say, as Steve was saying, that it's stealing a chunk of the raster off of this and reproducing it here. And up here you can see the back of that light to see how it's put together. I have no idea what this costs. Probably not cheap. This is the software which is integrating this sampling information. This is a very expensive version of what that cheap iOS software was doing on the CMO. Also, there were these whatchamacallums on the ceiling that are being sensed and monitored here, I guess for light overhead, tracking little thingies. And this is the camera that they were shooting this test with. There's an in-camera sensor right here that's looking up, and there's Teradek is doing something. Now, Brian is going to talk about volumetric in just a moment, so you'll go over in-camera. Mark first, but you will get there. So I'm going to leave that to you. I'm switching entirely to, remember film? That thing we used to look at? You could hold it up in front of you and see images on it. Very primitive. Had holes in it. And so there's a guy, Stuart Hunt. I've known him for years. He's been with Cintel forever. Cintel used to make telecines. And Cintel got bought by Blackmagic. And they've been making a scanner for a number of years. It hasn't completely caught on. It's not a bad machine. It's just been limited. And believe it or not, it's run by DaVinci Resolve. So if you have that machine, that Cintel that they sell for $32,000, I think it is. Yep. $32,000 is nothing, by the way. It's a drop in the bucket. It's not $350,000. It's not $450,000, which the other scanners cost. If you have that, then, and you have Resolve, even the free Resolve, you can run your whole scanner. It's kind of interesting. Now, what Stuart's done over the past year is he's improved the optics in the Blackmagic Design scanner. Now, for the first time, you can scan 16 millimeter at 4K. You couldn't do that before. That's significant. That changes the game when it comes to 16. Secondly, he's done something for years, I've been arguing about this. This is a gate. This happens to be for 8 millimeter film. It's typically called a skid plate. I don't like the word skid. I don't like film skidding over any surface. And I've always said, why aren't you putting bearings in there? They're such precise bearings. What has he done? He's not just the side bearings to keep the film in a channel, but he's put bearings here now, finally. And my hat is totally off to him for doing that. He's going to do it first in the 8 millimeter gate. He may build a 16 gate after that. Depends upon how it works. I think it's very interesting. He's also improved the spectral distribution of the RGB output of the light. Am I being thrown out? Okay, I'm almost at the end. This is the new DFT. DFT is a digital film transfer, German company, owned by an Indian conglomerate. Anyway, they've come out with an HK scanner, which does something really significant. You probably know, if any of you who are old enough and ever worked with film, that, of course it has these holes in it, and the holes are what you use to advance the film. Well, film, as it ages, motion picture film, it desiccates, it dries, plasticizers begin leaving the base. It curls, other things happen, sometimes it gets brittle. It doesn't like to go through a gate which has a registration pin. That becomes violent sometimes. So when you're working with archival film, you need to use rollers, you need to not use sprockets, but something new has just been invented in this machine. And what it is a gate where the film goes through, but there are no pins. It's intermittent. Every frame gets stopped before it, in effect, is photographed. But it has like a frame that comes down on top of the film and pins down the film all the way around. And it's a remarkable piece of engineering. And again, I take my hat off again to these guys for doing something like this. There are what probably are PT rollers, particle transfer rollers over here. I don't know what all else is in here, but it's a fairly simple film path. I thought that was cool. This is that same machine, and you can see it flashing red, green, and blue. And again, the gate is up here, but when the flash happens, the gate actually lowers. The gate is doing this all the time. There are only 3 of these machines in existence. They're all at the German Film Archives. This machine at NAB was being taken to LA for demonstration purposes. I think that's going to catch on. The other thing I saw at the laser graphics booth was a film cleaning machine. Now I'm revealing some roots. I was a technical director at a film laboratory once. Film has to be cleaned. Digital files don't have to be cleaned, and videotape was rarely, you didn't want to touch it. Film, you have to clean. How do you do that? You use chemicals, which are volatile, which are cancer-inducing. That's not good. So what do? So this guy, he's a young Ukrainian who lives in London. He's working at a film lab, and he decided to use his engineering chops to build a modern film cleaner. I call it a desktop film cleaner. It's not a huge thing like refrigerator size like they used to be. And this is what he's done. He's from Donetsk, by the way. We had a long talk about that. He's very angry, as you can imagine, but that's off topic. So this is a close shot of the machine. These are, again, particle transfer rollers. These are little buffers. What he's using as a liquid is, believe it or not, naphtha. And what's really cool about that, you see this tiny little thing right here? That's the tank for the naphtha. It puts on a thin film that's so thin that this can run many, many, many rolls of film. It's hard to believe, because in the old days, you'd be dripping perchloroethylene or something wonderful like that, and the whole room would smell to high heavens. That's kind of amazing. This is what's involved in controlling a machine just to clean film, nothing more. Okay, we're almost at the end. This is a possible useful new editing tool. Possible. This is over at the Adobe stand, and they announced something that's kind of an automatic film transcriber. It auto-transcribes. In other words, you shoot this guy yapping, and what he's saying comes up over here. Now, I haven't really dived into the particulars because I don't use Adobe products because I don't like paying the fee. But that's just me. I'm in the Blackmagic world, and wouldn't you know it, Blackmagic announced the same thing. And I talked to one of their guys, engineering-wise, and he told me, if you can believe it, that in Blackmagic, it's a kernel inside of the software. In other words, I think these guys are relying upon, I'm not sure, we'll have to look it up, but it's probably cloud-based and it's probably AI-based. Blackmagic's going to put all of that transcription into the software itself. And then I said, well, what about English? I mean, anything beyond English? Because DaVinci Resolve supports 28 languages. They said, yeah, we'll get to that, but it'll take some time. I don't know. I cannot believe that, first of all, DaVinci does too many things. It's got too many blades in the jackknife. We'll see. But that's a sign of the times. That's where things are going. And you might say, well, that's fantastic. It puts transcribers out of business, but it would be really useful to have. And any of you that have worked with automatic transcription services over the internet and that kind of thing, sometimes they're accurate, sometimes they're kind of not. So you always have to go through them anyway. This is the best micro LED display I saw, because I'm a big fan of what's coming. And this was stunning, 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 I thought, as micro LEDs always are. I mean, even my camera picked up how good it was. This is the back side of this, and this is the tiling. Now you can see it, you know, in an image like this, but you normally can't see it at all. It's pretty darn good. This is the best LED signage I saw, only because how can you resist? Okay? And this is the best cool tool that I saw at NAB. And that's just a way to have these funny little weird metric screws on hand when you inevitably always lose them, because every cage made in China, the screws back out. I'm not knocking China, I'm just saying. So I thought this was interesting. After I looked at it, Small Rig makes it, of course, and after I looked at it for a while, I thought, you know, it should be made out of plastic. But that's another thing. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Much appreciated. Those of you who've been around SMPTE for years know that a small number of our members have been elevated to fellowship by their peers. It's a very complicated process that takes place every year, where there are nominations and voting, and people who have patents and made technical contributions to the industry above and beyond the fray get recognized, and it will come as no surprise to you that David is a fellow of the Society of Motion Picture and Television Engineers. Thank you. Among those, there is a very small handful of individuals who have been elevated to the highest level of membership and honor within the society, and that is Life Fellowship. And our next speaker is a Life Fellow of the Society, Mark Shubin. A few other facts about Mark I can think of. He's a voting member of and a senior member of the National Academy of Television Arts and Sciences, the committee that gives away the Emmy Awards. He is the prime mover and organizer of the HPA Tech Retreat every year, maybe the inventor of the HPA Tech Retreat. Mark serves as the de facto historian of our industry. Mark is a often published author in our trade magazines and journals. And Mark prides himself, among other things, of having walked the aisles of every NAB for, I don't know, how many has it been?
This is my
51st NAB, and walks every aisle and visits every booth. And tonight we will get the benefit of his view of the 2023 Year 100 NAB. Thank you, Mark.
They gave out ribbons this year for how many years you've gone to NAB, and they didn't have one for 50, so they gave me 225 plus. My first NAB was 1973. And I'm not going to go over everything on this slide, just the things in gold. Plus, I'll note that Canon came out with a 34:1 zoom lens that year, a dual zoom. But there were cameras that used tubes, and therefore color cameras needed registration. Broadcast dominated. There was equipment for transferring film. And BME remarkably predicted, based on 2 digital introductions that year, that someday the analog signal may disappear. So here we are at the 2023 NAB show, and these are tube-based color cameras. And they are improperly referred to as something that was put in because this was the 100th NAB show. The Museum of Broadcast Technology has had an exhibit at every NAB show for many years, and they've had their tube-based cameras, various forms of them. And on the easel is that registration chart. People were saying, what's that chart for? What do you do with that? This year, the NAB show, the National Association of Broadcasters show, had a broadcast district because the rest of the show was definitely not broadcast. You heard about the various film transfer systems. This is one that you didn't hear about. And then this one, which I like very much, Filmic Technologies, Jim Lindner, some of you may be familiar with. He was the founder of SAMA, which was used for converting analog tapes to digital files. Now he's doing the same for film. There's a lot of film out there, but there are not a lot of technicians available. So he came up with a film transfer system that your grandmother can use. And it doesn't matter if you thread it wrong, and it doesn't matter if the film is backwards or upside down, it will still work. Magnetic track, optical track, it will still work. And he's working on multispectral light source for even more out of it. The crowds are back, as you heard from David, about 20% more people at NAB this year. But there were more food trucks than outdoor exhibits. That's a line of food trucks on the right, and the two tents are where the outdoor exhibits were. So the theme of this year's NAB to me was hyper-reality. Maybe you didn't spell that right. They have three flags there, the American flag, the Nevada flag, and the third one, I believe, is a Mandalorian flag. And the Mandalorian was the first significant show to use virtual production, which it did in 2018. So this is not a brand new concept. This is last year at the show. They had an Unreal ride, virtual production set up, and huge line of people waiting to get on the ride. This was this year at the show with 20% more people, and not so many people waiting, not so many people watching it. It has now become old hat. But it is reality, and virtual production is a big thing. And one of the significant virtual production systems was Magic Box, which is a virtual production studio in a truck. And they use it for the car racing circuit, and that's why they have the planks there for getting Formula One cars or other cars in there for doing their virtual production. SMPTE has a rapid industry solutions group that is used for assisting with virtual production and similar topics. You may hear more about that later. This company I liked a lot, Zero Density. They have a camera tracking system called Traxis, and it does not require anything special. You don't need any special clothing, marks, anything like that, no special things to carry. You just go onto the set and it tracks you, and you can use that on either a green screen set or an LED set. And on the LED set, it can be used to make graphics come in around you. On the green screen set, it can be used for lighting, to have shadows fall where they want them to fall. And then here's another company, very inexpensive. In fact, the lowest price is free. They have a 3D clean plate system for green screen. You move the camera around, it gets different views of what your green screen is, and then it cleans it up. And so whatever, like that dark corner over there, that would disappear based on the clean plate. Very interesting also where these two companies come from. They're not the usual technology centers that you would think of. Aximetry is based in Budapest, Hungary, and Zero Density is based in Turkey. So the NAB show this year, their theme was Welcome to What's Next. And here we are in the West Hall with perhaps the largest exit sign I have ever seen. I could sleep in a bed the size of that exit sign and have room for other people to join me. And it is right above a solid cinder block wall. So perhaps what's next is going to be a doorway. Here's another sign in the West Hall. Gender was an interesting issue at NAB this year, or lack of issue, I should say. No scantily clad women in the camera sets, and a lot of the camera sets had musicians who were just jamming, and so they could be there all day jamming and having a good time. And TV News Check's Women in Technology Awards is usually a room full of women, and this year there were a lot of men. And it's a good place to figure out who you're going to hire. But we still had a spokesmagician at a booth, so that was good. NAB announced the winners, plural, of the Product of the Year. There were, in fact, 150 products of the year. There were 1,208 exhibitors, so you had about a 1 in 8 chance of getting a Product of the Year award. But that's just NAB. TV Technology had its own Product of the Year awards, and they had 59 winners, and the same publishers, other publications had other awards that were given out, and other publishers gave out awards. And then there are independent awards, or so-called independent, from the International Association of Broadcast Equipment Manufacturers, the BAM Awards. At least they went to people with names that you're not necessarily that familiar with: Aximetry, Hammerspace, Quib, Switch, and Varnish, and so on. There was a new award this year that NAB gave out, the Excellence in Sustainability Awards, 9 awards plus 6 honorable mentions. But people flew to NAB, and your carbon footprint is pretty awful when you're flying. So really, we can do production and post remotely in the cloud, but we have to gather in Las Vegas to learn about software. This is a Chris Chinnock report, and he's reporting on NAB. He didn't go this year, but that didn't stop him from writing 3 articles about it. Maybe we do have to show up in person, at least so we can get the printed guide. I was looking for something in the central hall. I had plenty of bandwidth on my Wi-Fi. I had just done a Zoom call, no problem. And I'm waiting and waiting and waiting, and I can go on for half an hour here. It never came up. So I just picked up the paper guide and quickly found what I was looking for. And so here's a booth that's giving out notebooks, because that's useful. There was low-level hype at the show. Here's a company, I don't mean to pick on them, but they say their cameras can be any speed, any resolution, any cable length. Well, okay, we know what they meant, but you know, if I said I want a quadrillion pixels per line, I want a frame rate of 10 trillion, I don't think they're going to be able to do that for me. And here's Prime Focus Technologies. They have AI products, and one of their products, they say, will automatically convert horizontal videos into square and vertical formats. Really? Here is a scene from the War of the Roses. About the only way I can think of that you convert that to a vertical format is by shrinking it down so you can't even see anyone is in the picture. Here's a company, MuxWave, that said they had a holographic LED screen. Now, it's a transparent LED screen, and that's impressive, perfectly fine, but it's not holographic. There is nothing holographic about it. And then here's a story about ATSC3. And as most stories about ATSC3, it talks about its two-way interactivity. Now, to be fair, I cut off the bottom line. It says that's with over-the-air broadcast signals working in tandem with broadband. But if you're working in tandem with broadband, why do you need ATSC3? So here is something from this area. It was a company in Port Washington back in the 80s, early 90s, ACTV, and they had limited one-way interactivity. And you can do that with ATSC3 too. Zenith broadcast pay TV in 1951, and they did need a return channel, and the return channel was a telephone line. But the telephone line had much less bandwidth than the TV signal. But the proposed ATSC 3.0 return channels are wired and Wi-Fi internet networks. So here is my T-Mobile 5G modem this week at 7:40 in the morning, and I've got 242 megabits coming down. if I deducted 20 or if I added 20 to that because ATSC was filling that in, I wouldn't even notice. So, vincit omnia veritas, truth will out. And 5G will only get better, but those of you who are depending on 5G, and you heard David say that on his Lower East Side area, he doesn't really get great internet. If you look at this chart on the left, this is January of this year. T-Mobile seems to be doing better than the others, but less than 50% availability, even for T-Mobile down at the bottom. And so Teradek says, you want to be safe, use all the carriers. So transmit stuff on Verizon and T-Mobile and AT&T at the same time. Well, how do you do that? Teradek now sells data cards, SIM cards, and Teradek Data's service will work on all of the carriers simultaneously. This I thought was interesting, coexistence of ATSC 3.0 and 5G in the same RF channel. And here are some people, they won the NAB Innovation in Technology Award, and they did come up with a wonderful system. It's for informing first responders when there's an emergency, giving them all the information they want. It's an ATSC3 based data dump. It's a good system, it's well engineered, it's got great results. There is no reason it had to use ATSC3. Why do I say that? Well, this was transmitted over broadcast radio in 1948, a facsimile edition of the New York Times. They transmitted 4 editions a day. It did not affect the audio that was being transmitted on the radio at the same time. It was a subcarrier. But ATSC3 is the most sustainable TV delivery system, and they don't tell you that. Instead, they tell you that it's got interactivity and that it can do all kinds of other things that is nothing special about ATSC3. The list of the companies involved on the left there and the people in the booth that you see on the right, I believe is probably more than the number of people who are receiving ATSC3 at home. And 5G is not resting. They are trying to come up with a more sustainable way of transmission. Meanwhile, antenna adoption is going up, so broadcast is a good thing, a good business to be in. Why can't they just push that instead of the garbage? And here's an article about ATSC3 in 2023, and they say, fair warning, this update on the status of ATSC3, also known as Next Gen TV, will read a lot like the one from last year and maybe the one from the year before. So there's a bipartisan group of senators who are pushing the FCC on ATSC3, and so at the NAB show, the head of the FCC said, yes, that's great, we're calling for a public-private initiative to get it out there. What does the public-private initiative consist of? We don't know yet. Speaking of transmission, here is a new service, Manifold Cloud, and this is an interesting cloud because it's not really a cloud. This is a do-it-yourself cloud. If you have more than one edit suite and they're not all using the same amount of computing power at the same time, then maybe you can take advantage of that. This was NAB's smallest booth. You're looking at approximately the full booth there. And they use AI. They're in the business of translation and subtitles and things like that. So here are their AI services. Here are some other examples of AI at NAB. Ones that I call no problem. Atelier Connect does deep analysis. It compares frames so that you don't have to store things that are duplicated. They may get as much as 90% reduction in storage that way. MediaKind uses AI for encoding and upscaling, and Aquila for sustainability. Note the Super Bowl on the right there. It was said to be transmitted in 4K, and it was transmitted in 4K. It wasn't shot in 4K. It was upscaled to 4K. A little more about that in a moment. VizRT using AI for keying. Now, the second group, maybe you need to do some supervising, because if you have what you heard before about transcripts and text-based editing, great idea, but you know, what if it makes a mistake? in-betweening from EVS, why do you need to go to high frame rate if you can simply in-between ad infinitum, but maybe you can't do it ad infinitum, tagging of various things. And then we have caution. NHK Enterprises had this wonderful thing called Kiki, a sign language interpreter who is entirely artificial. But what if she makes a mistake? And Veritone had generative AI for things like talent acquisition. Well, how does it know what you want exactly in the way of talent? IMAX had their first NAB exhibit, and their company, SimWave, measures streaming quality. And so this is available on their website, and this is from the Super Bowl. And usually the streams had a score of about 73 to 83. This particular moment of this particular stream had a score of 48, and obviously doesn't look too good. So why do you want to go to 4K before you get to the television set so that you're increasing the amount of data that you're transmitting when you were shooting in HD and the TV set can do its own upscaling? But what do I know? I flunked the Turing test. I used ChatGPT. I was working on a project, and I said, can you name women in pioneering television engineering research? And they said, oh, yeah, here's 4 of them. Well, 3 of them didn't seem to be right, but that second one, Marion Edwards, wow, she sounded just perfect. And so I said, tell me more about engineer Marion Edwards. And it gave me this fantastic bio. I believed every word of it. Wow, this is amazing. How come I don't know about this person? And then I started looking into it, and not a word in that is true. And you'll notice up at the top, you may not be able to read it, but next to the green ChatGPT logo, it says 1 of 7, because I regenerated 7 times, and each time I regenerated, it turned out another wonderful resume that was completely different. Sometimes she worked for RCA, sometimes she worked for CBS, sometimes she worked on colors, sometimes she worked on other things. Just total lies. So I contacted somebody who works in AI, and I said, I got these results. And, oh, yeah, no, you can't do searching with AI. Put in something that you've written and ask it to summarize it. So, okay, I put in my bio, and I asked it to summarize it. And this is the woman who came up. But each time that I had it summarize my bio, it said that I was a member of the Broadcasting and Cable Hall of Fame. I'm not. It's not in my bio. I was not searching for anything. But every time I regenerated, it said, and he's a member of the Broadcasting and Cable Hall of Fame. Why? Another problem is possible infringement, and Getty Images is suing Stable Diffusion for copyright infringement now. How do they know that their copyright infringement is being infringed? Well, on the left you see a Getty Images photo in the search mode, and so it's got a little Getty Images logo on it. And on the right is one that Stable Diffusion has generated, a new picture, and it decided that part of the picture should be the Getty Images logo. Same problem that people have been having in cancer research. They have AI look through images in medical texts to see carcinomas so they can identify carcinomas. Well, in medical texts, they always have a little ruler by the carcinoma, and it says the carcinoma is this big. So the AI has decided if there's a ruler, it's cancer. If there's no ruler, it's not. And you may have seen this, the AI-generated song with Drake in The Weeknd, and this wasn't even suing. Universal just said, no, 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 and they pulled it down. Blackmagic Design now has 2110 gear, so hooray, they're doing SMPTE IP stuff, but not a lot of it. In that little red circle is where their 2110 gear is. The rest of the booth is not, but here's some new stuff from them. These are routing switchers, and the bottom one is a 40 by 40 12G routing switcher, so it can do 4K at 60 frames per second for $4,000. Hard to justify IP when you have those kind of prices. Here were some new 2110 cameras that came out from Grass Valley and Ikegami, and these are both 2110, but they're also SDI because, you know, that's what people have. And now we have a new way of moving digital information around, Dante AV plus Dante AV Ultra and Dante AV-H. And NDI also has a new version, NDI HX3. Rotolite has this smart softbox with an electronically controllable diffuser on it. That's technology that's been around for a while. This is actually more exciting, Sony's electronically variable ND filter, but even that was introduced previously. Ari, who is our host here, has Ari Live, a new tally system and a camera control panel that can be used for live shots because a lot of people want to do PL mount stuff live. But Netflix, the #1 streamer for a long time, wanted to do a live transmission at the eve of NAB, and oops, they weren't able to do it. Everything was fine to the end of the truck, but it didn't get out onto Netflix. This lens that David mentioned is for PL mount, and so we're now getting in PL mount zooms roughly where Canon was in 1973 for tube-based cameras. And vertical video, here's a PTZ camera from Verticam that does vertical video. Blackmagic Design has vertical shooting software for their pocket cinema cameras. Astro Design, 8K at 240 frames per second. There's a new Audio-Technica microphone on the left. And then this New Zealand company, Dotterel, has a microphone called Konos that has 80 microphone elements. Now, why would you want 80 microphone elements? Well, I'm going to play a little video, and the first thing you're going to hear is what a camera-mounted mic sounds like, and then you will hear this two-way audio system that Dotterel has come up with.
What I was just trying to say might have been a call for help, it might have been critical instructions, it could have even been a threat. Up until now, there's been no way to tell.
Do interviews over drone. You saw this 3D stuff previously, the Sony ELF SR2. The main thing is that they're now up to 27 inches, but they were not the only people with an eye-tracking autostereoscopic display at the show. Asus had this laptop that can also do it. This was another monitor at Sony, the BVM HX3110. It's an HDR monitor that can go up to 4,000 nits, except if you read the asterisk, it says it's not guaranteed and the limiter may work under certain conditions, so take things with a grain of salt. But here's a story that was in Variety saying that viewers were outraged over scenes that were too dark, and HBO defended them as an intentional creative decision. Well, yeah, it was an intentional creative decision in a dark grading room with an HDR monitor, but that's not how people were watching it at home. So here is technology that was shown at NAB in 2016 by ISO Video, and there's not even AI involved in this. It's basically a spatial high-pass filter, and it can turn HDR into SDR that is visible to people. But back to that Sony monitor, they have a technology very important because they're using 2 LCD panels, and so they have a fast response mode, but it has a license. So David was saying before, he's not crazy about the license stuff. He likes to buy things. Well, you can buy the monitor, but you can't buy the license for the fast response. You have to keep paying for that. Also, the viewing angle on this monitor is 89 degrees. So for grading suite, that's terrific. That's more than you need. 89 degrees, big viewing angle here. But in a truck where there are 3 video operators sitting next to each other and looking at each other's monitors to see what they should be doing, not necessarily so great. Amazon, new feature to boost dialogue in movies and TV shows. This is the same as the HDR problem except for audio. And Alluvio you heard of before, really a great system and also sustainable because it uses the new Ethereum for payment, and that is much, much less energy draining than something like Bitcoin. And finally, I was tempted to put in the name of this company that said join us at our booth, but I figured, nah, especially since they're not really in that business. But does anyone notice something strange about this image? Well, viewfinder, that's the diopter of the viewfinder that's facing the wrong way, but something down a little lower, the lens cap is on. This QR code that's on here is for these slides if anyone wants it, or if you don't have the QR code, it's bit.ly/SNY, as in SMPTE New York, -NAB 23.
Thank you very much, Mark. I failed to mention that Mark has a day job as well as all the other accolades. Mark is responsible for the live broadcast from the Metropolitan Opera every week, for those of you who attend those at the theaters around the country. Our next speaker, we've alluded earlier to the Rapid Industry Solution Initiative within SMPTE, and our next speaker is actually an active member of the first RIS initiative, which is the OSVP, On-Screen Virtual Production Initiative. And Brian has been an active participant since it began, and is going to bring us up to speed, not just on the initiative and put it in some context for us, but also on what happened at NAB regarding virtual production, a hot new topic for the last 4 or 5 years, and certainly accelerating in interest for everybody in the industry right now. So, Brian Kobolars.
Thank you very much for the intro, Jeff. One thing, first, it's on-set virtual production, and the Rapid Industry Solution thing is something that we hope to be holding a show on here later on this fall that's going to go through the entire process. And let me take the opportunity to also mention that just this week, John Gallagher with BMCC has also joined the RIS OSVP in education, if I'm correct. Thank you, John. It's great to have somebody else to help share the load. He's a fantastic person. So in any case, mine, I promise, is going to be the shortest one, and it's also going to be the hardest, because look at the people I need to follow. Volumetric production was one of the most talked about topics at this year's NAB show. People were going in and trying to find out what was going on. You could find it scattered throughout the show floor. And I was very happy to see that at least one exhibitor made sure that we saw the entire backside so that people understood a little bit about the rigging that you need to do to begin with. Got close-ups of it as well, the power distribution, feeding each one, and then just think about the color management that you need to end up doing later on. This was already alluded to, and it's something from in the past, but when people first came into the show, this is what they saw. They saw the entire screen setup. You sat on the motorcycle. What they didn't mention is you also had a fan blowing on the motorcycle. The MoCo control system was tied in with everything else, all this feeding into the Unreal Engine. And then you had the opportunity, you can see there somebody sitting in it, motorcycle's tilting, the background is tilting, everything in sync. And then there were also monitors. People were taking pictures of it. They loved it for that regard. But it is getting old. Then, moving along, LED displays themselves. What was new here? Well, LG ended up displaying a video wall. There were other manufacturers that had other exhibits going throughout the entire show floor. And they were just good to look at because everybody got a better picture of what LED was overall. One thing that I will say that's actually, let's let this run for a little bit, and you can see the people moving the crane in and out, and see the end picture on the upper left over there from just that wall. Okay, one thing that surprised me, I expected when I went into the show to see, as I had in some prior shows, that Zeiss would be there with their own booth, or Cook, any of the others. The major lens manufacturers, I didn't see booths specifically to them, but their products were all over the show floor. And one thing to point out that not many people are realizing, there's going to be a lot of lenses out there that are going to become available on the market because they don't have the lens data. And you need that metadata for doing virtual production. Otherwise, it's just not going to work. Now, this is something with NCAM, and David mentioned it briefly, but this is, and don't ask me to explain it because I can't yet. Maybe somebody else here far more intelligent than me can. But this is a distortion field that they're mapping on the lens to end up getting that fine level of detail to bring it into the rest of the system. And then Assimilate ended up bringing up this new program, LiveFX. They pronounce it a little bit differently. But this is a way of virtually calibrating all of your lenses to work within the system. It's too small, perhaps, for most of you to see. I hope you can. Your eyesight's much better than mine. If you see all the small dots in there that are around the screen, it takes a few minutes, but it's almost like, you know, warming up your camera. It ends up doing a whole series of maps on the lens, takes all of that together, calibrates the lens system going into Unreal Engine and the rest of everything else. And this works both on green screens and in a VR environment. And so in the final, you're golden and ready to go. I was going to also say with NCAM and tying this into it, a note that I made, you can take a Sony Venice, the Venice 2, which is now at the 8K, with NCAM into a Helios LED processor. LiveFX takes care of all the production issues that might be there, moire, et cetera, et cetera. It learns the size, shape, and resolution of the entire LED wall and works with that through the entire time. The innovation here, and there are a couple other people that are beginning to do it, is that if the camera begins to stray a little bit past the edge of the LED wall, well, there's now an extension that the software will bring into it to fill in that void, artificially creating it so that this way, oops, bring it back in, and you're all set and ready to go. And it also is beginning to interface, I think it was Dave that was mentioning before with lighting, beginning to interface fully with the lighting so that this way, if you have a change in light, it will automatically do the compensation. And that change in light can even be as much as a fire in a building where you have a constant flicker or a campfire, anything else, it will compensate, bring that in so that it looks realistic. And then moving on to one of the others, Sony. They began to bring in some cloud-based applications. Much of their stuff is under development right now, not fully mature, but it's getting very, very close. They have under development a virtual production toolkit, which is going to improve all the pre-production and on-set workflows. Now, these end up taking care of a number of the challenges that you might face, such as color matching. Moire was mentioned earlier. It's going to automatically begin compensating for that, so it's no longer a concern when you're setting up. And then also a extension system to the Venice camera that will allow the head to be moved about 40 feet away from the rest of the camera and still work within the VR environment. So that's going to be a big one insofar as being able to get things, move them around where you need them, when you need them, in the right place. Let's see, and we won't get into the cables. I had a note on that in there. They have also introduced the virtual production toolkit, which I began to mention, but that includes now a virtual Venice camera. One thing that the virtual cameras do, everybody's mentioned this little display. This is a 27-inch. And the question was, what good is this in virtual production? If you're in a virtual art department, you're creating all the mats, all the artwork, everything that goes behind it. This is a beautiful way of doing that work and knowing where things are going to place, in what time, and as you move a virtual Venice around inside and the image begins to shift around, you can see what your end result is going to be to know if the artwork that you're developing is going to work for that specific scene. And now I'm going to also move to our host, but it's actually kind of a indirect on the host because this is ARRI. But right now we're in ARRI rental for lighting. This is ARRI Solutions, which is a brand new branch of ARRI that was just brought in at the NAB show. What I'm going to be talking about is not yet released. They're going to actually do their rollout at the Cinegear show with a full presentation on it there. So I'm just going to give a very, very brief interview on this. And the models that I'll mention, they're just prototypes right now. They may or may not be ready to go this year. But this solutions group has ended up, well, it's the newest business unit, as I mentioned, and what they are doing is tying this into an Alexa 35. And they have the ability to stream, changing focus, iris, zoom data from the signature zooms directly out of the camera's Ethernet port. They are also utilizing some dollies that can tie into it, and they've been working with Cartoni to end up developing a new head, new fluid head, that is also going to have all the data within it that's going to be brought into the system at the same time. So you're going to have full functionality across the entire spectrum of not only your lens, camera position, everything else directly in there. May spell the end for a few other things that are going on. And all this metadata is then brought into the Unreal Engine, which ends up giving you your end product. And then because Unreal also knows exactly where the camera was, and you're able to program DMX lighting, DMX control directly into the system at the same time. Tentatively, the prototype is named a DLB1. The name will probably change as time goes on. You can ask them about that at Cinegear. And I'm going to end up, let's see, I should have shown that a little bit earlier. That has a couple of the points that I brought up. SMPTE-NY. We were treated one evening there, and a few of us here were in attendance to that. The members of the RIS OSVP team were invited out to view studios, along with the SMPTE governors. And you're looking at a volume right there. There we have the ceiling, some lighting up above it. Their virtual art department put together that entire background. You could walk around, even when you're standing a foot away. You cannot see any of the seams. I just found that to be amazing from my own point. And then in the upper corner, They also had live video going. I will say, and I expressed this to some of the other people on the team, even that evening, the one thing that disappointed me about all of this, there was no reason they couldn't have had the fountains in motion. it's a, okay. In the desert, that's important. Colorado's drying up. So just a couple of other things that I wanted to bring up. Rose earlier did a great overview about membership. And she's chair, wherever she went, she's head of membership for SMPTE. I'm the membership chair for the New York section, and a couple things that I'd like to bring up that got passed over, unfortunately. One of them is, if you sign up for a very limited time, I know, we're offering a 15% discount on membership. That makes it even more valuable. If you're a student or you know a student that should be a SMPTE member, their first year is free. Let them find out about what it is that we do, get access to over 100 years of the SMPTE Journal, basically a complete history of all broadcasts, et cetera, et cetera. Something that is very, very hard to avoid if you know that it's there. So there are membership cards out at the front table. There's a QR code they can scan and go directly to the membership site on the SMPTE page. Grab some and take them home with you. Pass them out to people you know. We'd love to have them aboard. With that, I turn it back over to Jeff.
I want to thank you all who made it through to the end, and thank you especially Brian for going last and doing a great job bringing us up to speed on RIS and virtual production. For those of you who made it to the end, we have a couple of T-shirts, not many, 4 that Mark is holding, but whoever would like a T-shirt, please take some swag before you leave this evening. We do have a few minutes. Obviously, it's late, so if there are any really important questions anyone wants to ask, please ask it of the panelists now, but otherwise, we're going to be brief. We have a question here and here. I'm going to pass you this microphone. Would you like to go first?
Was Assimilate's lens calibration just for their own product, or could they export the lens profile?
I believe that that's still.
It's on.
It was, okay. I believe that is across the board. Once it takes the metadata, brings it over, then it can work with it.
Okay, there you go.
Hi, I have 2 quick questions. One is that there was passing mention a couple of times of blockchain, and so I wanted to know more about the implementation of blockchain. And the other was there was mention of the film to digital, the scanners, but audio wasn't mentioned. So how is that handled when you're dealing with frame to frame to frame?
The other one? I'll take a crack at both of those. As far as blockchain is concerned, I recommend you go to the Alluvio site. Michelle Munson has many, many papers that she has done on what Alluvio is doing and how blockchain is being used. Warner Brothers for Lord of the Rings, the series, has gone whole hog on the Alluvio system and is offering a tremendous amount of stuff, and Michelle did a paper on that at the HPA Tech Retreat this year. It's not anyone else's blockchain, it's Alluvio's system. And as I mentioned, for the money part of it, they are basing it on the low energy Ethereum, the post-merge Ethereum. And so that's working very nicely and sustainably. As far as the audio and film, I did mention, but maybe you didn't hear it, on the Filmic system, they handle both optical and magnetic tracks. And because it's a system designed to be used by anyone, including your grandma, and the film might go in backwards or upside down, they have a magnetic head that has sufficient pickup that if the track is on the other side of the film, it will still be able to read it. And same thing with the optical, based on the depth of field that the system has. It can be on the wrong side and they'll still be able to read the optical track.
Are there any other questions?
Could you talk a little bit about deduplication in your MAM systems and how you can take a large library and then make it smaller somehow?
Yeah, traditionally, deduplication in the systems that I've used really comes down to a hash of the file, a checksum, to just compare those checksums with what's already in the system, right? So you don't get exact duplicates of files. Now there's also quite a few machine learning tools out there to help you identify things that might be different codecs, different bit rates, different rasters, to compare those. One of the issues that I see with those systems is they're tremendously compute intensive, and it costs you a lot to deduplicate the system. So if you were looking at deduplication, I would look at it from a standpoint of the entry point. So on ingest, you need to either analyze that footage and give a hash or a fingerprint of that file that would be bit rate and raster independent, and then compare those with the other files in your database. Going back and doing that historically, I haven't done that, but I would imagine that would cost a tremendous amount of money to go back and sort of reanalyze those files, as opposed to doing it sort of moving forward.
Yeah, well, I was wondering if they ever got into any content recognition systems yet with all the AI, where you can actually see the content, and have the machine actually, oh yeah, that's the same thing, the way a person would.
Yeah, there are systems out there that do that, and that's what I'm referring to as sort of reanalyzing.
Like computer, like ones and zeros, it's not really finding the image, right?
Well, you can do object recognition on you can do different kinds of image recognition on the file. So it is creating a language, if you will, that describes the that describes the image, and ultimately comes up with a I'm going to use the word fingerprint of that file, so that you could compare it and make sure that your certain parameters are independent of each other. As I said, image raster, bit rate, even quality, and you can compare files that way.
And that's why that parent-child is so important in that other software you're talking about, how you can link, on the ingest, you can link the parent to all the children and be able to retain that knowledge as you go forward in your archive.
That is a reason to do it, but there's also, the parent-child relationship allows you to see derivative works from your hero asset, which is very important. As far as matching partial images, I really don't know. I have to imagine there are systems out there that do that, but I'm not aware of how that is done.
Maybe on the 200th anniversary.
It'll all be automatic.
Thank you very much, everyone, for coming. And Barry has and I would also want to thank the panel for being so good. Barry has a message for you.
And thank you, John Costa, and the students from BMCC and Kingsborough for documenting this tonight. So, and yeah, and for our friends at RE Rentals, we need to channel our inner AV squad and hotel services. So we have to break down all the cabling, and also we'll bring out the chair racks and put the chairs back on the racks so we leave this as a clean space. So thank you very much, and safe travels.